So today we're going to take a look at some of our favorite new features for 2024. Again, this is not going to be a fully detailed explanation of these features or exactly how to use them necessarily. It's more about kind of an overview and a sneak peek at what these things are. So if you're not in the beta program, this gives you an idea of what you can expect for Mastercam 2024 and some of the great new features. If you are in the beta program, that's awesome. I really am glad to hear that. We definitely like it when people are getting into the beta because more people in the beta means that we get a more polished product for everyone. There's always going to be software testing, but it's hard to be able to hit every scenario that you might actually run into in a shop or different workflows that people use. So more people in the beta is always helpful. For today, we're going to be going over this list of particular new features. And, excuse me. And if I'm looking at this list, normally I try to think of a theme for what is the update for the year. Like, what is the style of updates this year? And really, I kind of see two. I see, on one hand, we have more automation, which is what we've seen in a couple of other versions of Mastercam that have come out in the last few years, for sure. But I'm also seeing some things in here that I would consider as intuitive updates. These are updates that it's going to take a week or two to get used to them, but once you are used to them, you'll probably forget that it's a new feature at all because they're just so simple and easy to use, and they just make sense within the workflow. So I'm really excited about those. I think in a way, those are kind of my favorite things because being able to just do something without thinking about it very much is really kind of a nice way to go about programming. And as a note, today is May 17th, and Mastercam 2024 releases on June 1st, so get ready for that. That also means that if you are far enough back, let's see, with 24, 23, 22, 21, 20, 2019, I think. I think it's 2018. If you're currently on 2018, then that version is sunsetting, which means that there's going to be no support for it at all. So it's definitely time to update if you have not done so already. All right, so let's take a look at the first update for Mastercam 2024, and this is the GView Cube. This is a new visualization tool that they've added to Mastercam, and in a way, this is one of those kind of intuitive updates, in my opinion. It's something that is going to be there, and it's going to be easy to use, easy to click, and it's so useful in so many scenarios. But because it's just kind of right there, and after you kind of get a quick understanding of it, it kind of becomes self-explanatory. So the GView Cube is found in the lower left-hand corner of the graphics screen, and it allows us to have quick access to several common views within Mastercam, and it also gives us new views that we haven't had before. It's also going to give us some additional movement controls as well. So let's take a look at how this works in practice and see how this can be useful to you. All right, so here I have just a part in Mastercam. I'm in Op 1, and I have my GView Cube right down here. Now, if you've loaded 2024, you might notice that my cube is a bit bigger than yours, and that's because you can adjust the size of it. If you right-click on the cube, you get this option for settings down here, and then you get this panel where you can change certain settings. And this isn't just the GView Cube, it's also some other settings. However, the cube gnomon size is right here on this slider, and I've bumped it up a little bit. I think by default it's down about here, and I find that this is probably a better spot for me, just for getting in there quickly and easily. There's some smaller stuff to click on this block at times, so if you have it too small, it can be kind of hard to use. So that's why I blow it up a little bit. So the idea of the GView Cube is simple. Anything on here that you see a name, you can click on that and it goes to that standard view. So here's our top view, right? If I wanted to go to front instead, then, in the past, I would either go up to my view tab and go and find front and click that, which might include multiple clicks depending on where I'm at. Or I might need to right click and then go to front here. That works too. But having this down here is just really simple. But what I really love about this cube is that it's not just the standard views. We can also get non-standard views. So let's say I wanted a front right view. I can click on this section between front and right, and it takes me to that view right there. I can get right back. I can get back bottom. I can even get bottom right back. So that's a really useful combination of views within this cube that's readily available. You can also click and drag on the cube, and depending on where you click, you get some different behavior. So I'm getting this rotation because I picked one of these corner intersection, or yeah, the corner intersection, not the tips, but the corners. If you just click on a face, you get dynamic rotation. Same thing happens with the corners, or the tips, right? Now, the buttons on the sides, if we click on them, are used for panning. If you alt-click them, you get rotation. And that works up and down and sideways. There's also this button here, which gives us several different options for changing our view, depending on the combination of keyboard buttons and clicks. Now, obviously, it's difficult to remember all these, so being able to hold your mouse over it and get a pop-up is pretty nice. But I think really most of what I'll probably use is just clicking it to flip 180, because I think that that's pretty useful. But my favorite part about this cube is that not only do we get all these views, but it also has a great default setting, in my opinion. If you right-click, this checkbox is turned on, relative to WCS. That means if my WCS changes, let's go to planes, and let's say I set my WCS to right side instead. Watch the cube. The cube will completely change and match whatever our WCS is. Now if I click top, that's a top view relative to our current WCS, which in this case is right. This means if I'm in op 1, right, I've got all my planes set up, and then I go to op 2 and I reset my planes, my cube is now relative to my op 2. So clicking on top makes it really easy to get to my top view for that operation. So who most benefits from this? Well, I think everyone does to a degree, but especially if you don't have this, a 3D controller or a motion controller. This is a tool that you use in the offhand. So if you're right-handed, it's typically going to be your left hand, and you use it to rotate the screen around. If you don't have one of these, perhaps you use a laptop and you travel a lot and it's not worth taking it around. Or maybe you're in school or you're teaching class. A lot of schools don't have these at every desk because they're kind of expensive for an entire classroom. Or you just don't have one and you don't have the budget to buy one and work's not going to buy one for you. In that case, this View Cube is going to be super, super useful. Now, this is probably the only thing we're really going to get into depth with today. We're going to go through the others a little bit quicker, but I really wanted to show this one off because I think that universally this is maybe the most useful update from Mastercam 2024 in terms of no matter what product you're using from Mastercam, this is going to be useful. So the next thing I want to talk about is stock model and verify. This is an awesome update. I'm really excited about it. It's because it gives us simple and effective verify setup. Now, let's say we're cutting that part and we want to take a stock model that's happened after an operation or two and use that as stock for verify. In a previous version of Mastercam, you would need to go into simulator options, select the stock model option, and then pick a stock model from the list. But with 2024, as long as you include it as the first thing in your operation chain, that is what gets pulled in for your stock in verify. So we'll take a look at that. Let's go back to op 1 here. And in my toolpaths manager, I've got my Opti Rest, which is why I have two stock models here. I decided to run this off of a stock model. Then I have another stock model after the Opti. So we can see, kind of how that came out. At this point, if I wanted to verify operations 4 through 11, then traditionally I would go through here and set up the option for stock model. But now all I have to do is make sure to include this stock model in my selection and then click verify. That automatically brings in that stock model and it's ready to run. So that is super fast, super useful. And again, I think of this as kind of an intuitive update. Once you realize that you just include that, then you're good to go. Now, you don't have to select them in this particular way. For instance, if I only wanted to run, ops 6 through 11, I can use control and click, and that can add an additional selection without picking operations in between. So now it picks that stock model and just runs the ops that I picked. So really loving that update. I think that that is a welcome update in my mind. So next up is color coding for multi-axis toolpaths. This is super neat. This is basically a tool that gives us more visibility while we're programming in multi-axis. A lot of toolpaths in multi-axis are supported. There's a list there at the bottom. And whenever you're using one of these toolpaths, you will be given options here for selecting colors for your machining geometries, floor geometries, avoidance, your guides, anything like that. If it's geometry that you select within those toolpaths, then they are highlighted on screen with color codes. So let's take a look at this, because I think that this is really useful for multi-axis programmers. So let's say that I wanted to do this pocket here, right? So in my toolpaths, let's say I'm going to do multi-axis pocketing. That comes up. And let's see, we'll start this off with a flat end mill. In my cut pattern, we can see that colors have been assigned to my machining geometries and my floor geometries. Now, these colors are not locked in. You can click on the box and change them if you prefer a different color. I'm going to leave them as default. And then we go to make our selections. So I'll use the selector here, and then shift click here to get all tangent walls and selection. In the background, those solid faces will assume that color while I have my toolpath parameters open. My floor geometry will be here, and we'll end selection. Now, the reason this is super useful, if I'm programming in multi-axis, when I'm not giving a presentation, I'll typically take this panel and just move it to a different window entirely. And then while I'm working on the toolpath, I'm basically just using a combination of loose cut tolerance, larger step overs, bigger depth steps, things like that. And I'm using the apply button in combination with generate toolpath. When we do that, it makes it quick and easy to make these operations and get a general sense of what they look like. So if I were to set this to 0.2, maybe 5 thousandths, and I don't know, 1/8. And then we need to define our stock. Okay. So we'll define our stock really quick here. Seems like that should have worked. Oh, I see. I understand why. We'll go ahead and turn the stock off for now, just so we can see how this works. So we'll go ahead and apply. And there we go. We have a quick toolpath. Now at this point, I can make my changes and keep hitting apply to see how that works out. But being able to see these colors is really helpful, because now I get at a quick glance, what did I select? That's been kind of one of the problems with multi-axis, is once you make your selection without any colors or any kind of indicator on what you selected, you kind of have to go back into geometry selection to remind yourself what it is. And that's especially true if you're coming back to an existing program that you may have programmed a long time ago or never did yourself. Someone else did it. So it's a great visual check for multi-axis. If we were to use a unified toolpath instead, one thing I really like about this is in the cut pattern, let's say that I had a couple of curves. These also have color codes associated with them. So let's say I'm using unified and we're going between there and here. In the background, I see those edges highlighted. And my machining geometry, pick that. So this is a great visual check. It also works with collision control. So if your toolpath is on that supported list and has collision control, then those also have their own associated colors. And it works for all 4 collision groups. So you have more colors there. They can all be set individually. You can change them to be all the same. It's up to you. So really love that update for multi-axis in Mastercam 2024. The next thing is visual linking for hole making toolpaths. This one is pretty cool. I think that it's going to make hole making a little bit more direct, and I think it's going to make it a little easier to process exactly what's going on with it. Generally, the idea here is that there's been a change to the linking parameters page for hole making toolpaths, and this allows us to use visual indicators on screen not just to look at, but we can also use them directly to modify our depths. This is only for hole making operations, and it covers the majority of them. I think there's a couple that it doesn't do, such as I think FBM and start hole, but we'll take a look at that in just a moment. So let's take a look at how this works in Mastercam. So let's say I'm going to add a drill toolpath, and I'm going to add it to all of those holes there. So I'll just come in here and control click, selecting all those, and let's change our sorting order. I'm going to start point to point here. Perfect. All right, green check there. And then we'll select a tool. I think it's this one here. And then under our linking parameters, when we open this page, we can see all of that in the background and the updated linking parameters page. Again, we're going to go over this in more detail in our new feature breakdown videos. However, today I just wanted to show you kind of the quick version of this. What's really cool is, in my opinion, one of the best parts is the tip comp has been brought into this page now. And so when we turn this on and we have that visibility on, if we zoom in here, you can actually see these little panels where we have depth and tip comp. This gives you a visual indicator of exactly what it is you're doing, because the tip comp is measuring basically from the full diameter of the drill, not including that tip, right? So as long as I make sure that my tip comp here is aligned with that, and then just go minus 10 or whatever it is, now I know that the full diameter of my drill is definitely getting all the way through this particular feature here. The other thing that's kind of neat is clearance. We can see how those show up. And right now they're individual, but if we switch this to absolute, then you get a large plane that fills everything. This is also a good visual indicator. When we look at something like this, we can see how it might intersect here. And so if we were going over the part, then that's something to keep in mind, right? Granted, we can also use things like automatic linking that gets around problems like that, but it's a nice visual check for us as we're programming to make sure that we're happy with everything that's going on. I like this because it really gives a clear visual indication of exactly what each of these parameters does within a hole making toolpath. So these linking parameters are supported in drill, chamfer drill, advanced drill, circle mill, helix bore, and thread mill. So FBM, auto drill, and start hole do not support this. However, it's not really needed for those anyways. But the visual linking, I think it's a really great way to see exactly what a drilling toolpath does. And another thing that's pretty exciting, it works in multi-axis too. So we're going to go over that when we do our new feature breakdown next month. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat and Demio. I'm happy to answer those as I can. Yeah, just keeping on going then. So the next thing to talk about is the B-axis contour tool axis control. We have a new tool axis control strategy for B-axis contour. So in Mastercam 2023, when this was introduced, we had two options. You could either do manual or automatic. Manual would require that you actually build tool vectors out of wireframe that intersected with the profile that you are chaining. Using automatic would basically just cut it to the best of its ability while preventing any tool collisions. We now get an option for modified, and there's a reason that this is important. With manual, it's a lot of work, right? And if you don't need it, why use it? So automatic is kind of the choice. Unfortunately, there are some situations where when it goes to make that automatic cut, the actual engagement of the tool isn't really ideal in some circumstances, such as the one we're going to look at today. The modified option allows us to take any existing vectors and adjust them, and it also allows us to add new vectors by just double-clicking and then picking an angle for that vector. So this gives us more control over our B-axis contour. The way that we use this, we need to make sure to generate the toolpath using the automatic function first. Then we can switch to modified. So let's take a look at an example. Here's Code Expert, since this is a dot machine environment. Perfect. All right, so we're going to look at operation 2. Taking a look at this in backplot, this is, I'll turn the tool on as well. So this was created using the automatic setting. So it's going to come in, and it's not colliding with anything, but here's my problem with it. Once we get to this point here, this is really not ideal. I don't want to start cutting way back on this insert. I really want it to be focused more towards the tip. So I want to adjust the vectors a little bit here so that my tool has more of an angle relative to this face. So to do that, we go into the parameters, and then we go to the basic motion control page and select the modified option. Then you click on this button over here to edit the vectors. And then what we'll get on screen are these vectors that pop up. So this is the automatic vectors that were created during the toolpath creation. At this point, what I want to do is adjust these a little bit. So I'm going to take this one, click it, and rotate it around. Notice that I have the tool in the background as well. This is a setting that can be toggled with the Shift key. So if I click on Shift, it goes away. Click on Shift again, and it comes back. So I don't know why you wouldn't want it. Honestly, it's very useful to see this. But I might add this at more of an angle, something like this. And then now at this point, I want to add an additional vector, because what's going to happen is the tool will transition from this vector to this vector throughout the cut. And that's a little bit too slow for me. I want it to happen sooner. So I can just, by eyeball, pick a new vector and double click. That creates a new one. And now I can set up that vector. And I might set this one about here. So once you're happy with your vector changes, click Enter on your keyboard, then green check, and then we can allow this to regenerate. And there are some problems with this. I do see some areas that I don't love, and I can see exactly why. The vector that I put in here was too aggressive, so it's needing to pull the tool off in order to make that cut. However, this section here, this looks a lot better than it did before with this kind of engagement. So really, this was my problem. The vectors that I chose were a little bit off. I would just need to go back and adjust those a little bit, and it should be fine. So the next thing is the Deburr enhancements. There's a couple of great enhancements for Deburr this year. And it really boils down to two basic things. The first one is the new option to avoid contact point on tip. What this will do is it forces the engagement point of the tool and the part itself off. So you can see a clear example of that here. By default, we get this kind of tip contact, and then with that turned on, we're forcing the contact farther off onto the sphere of this ball end mill. And the reason that's important, at the tip of a tool, you're basically approaching 0 SFM, and that can actually cause rolling and burring of your edge rather than deburring it. So that wouldn't be ideal. So by moving that contact point out a little bit like that, you're getting better cutting action on your tool, and you're making a cleaner cut around your part. The other big update is a couple of added tools. We can now use chamfer tools and dove mills. All right, so I have a couple of Deburr toolpaths to show you. Starting with this one. This is the spherical or ball-nosed end mill. And if I put this in backplot, we take a look at the tool, we can see that the contact point here is right on the tip of the tool. So it's not ideal. We definitely want to push that out. This is really easy to do. In the parameters, we just go to the tool axis control page, and at the bottom under contact here, we do have this new drop down for tip or flank/taper, which is a bit of an update. But we do want to use tip still, but this time I'm going to avoid contact point on tip. We'll let that regenerate, and it's done. So one simple click, and we get much better cutting action. We can see how this is cutting here. So the rule to how this works in the background is it is forcing the contact point to go halfway up the radius of the tool. That's how that works. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. If you've already got a ball end mill that you're using for something else on the part, this is a good way to deburr it, at least for the top edges where it can reach. Here I have the same Deburr path, however this is using a 1/4-inch chamfer mill. Now I really like this. In fact, when they announced Deburr and the new tooling in previous versions, I personally was very frustrated that they didn't include the chamfer mill because it's such a useful deburring tool. And think about this, if you wanted to create a chamfer along this entire part, like a multi-axis chamfer, what's the best way to do it? Well, I would think deburr with a chamfer tool is definitely the easiest way to do it. And now that they have added that support, that is true. It is very easy to do this. Simple deburr path, just choose the chamfer mill and then run it along just like normal. So if you wanted to turn this into more of a chamfer rather than a deburring pass, all you would want to do is change this edge shape and make it a bit bigger like I did here. And then the last one here, this is using a dove mill. And here I'm cutting the underside of this pocket. Now this might be important because this is op 2 for this part. And so we're going to be cutting through this pocket on this operation, and I might end up with a pretty decent burr down there. So using a standard dove mill, I can now come in here and cut that out. And that looks really nice. Now we could do this before with a lollipop tool, but I guess the idea here is not everyone has lollipop tools on hand. They have very limited function, right? There's not a ton you can really do with a lollipop. You can do deburring, you can do ports, and I don't really know anyone who uses them for stuff other than that. However, dove mills can be used for a lot of other things. So having a more standardized tool available to do something like this is very useful. It doesn't have to be any particular angle. Whichever kind of dove you're using does work with this toolpath. So that's pretty neat. One thing to keep in mind, especially when you're using a dove mill, is that under the tool axis control, your clearances fields here by default have some pretty big values in them. So it's definitely worth reducing these. Just make sure that your tool definition and holder definition are accurate for what you're using so that you don't end up with a problem. So great enhancements to Deburr. I'm really happy that that's there. All right. So this one is really interesting. This is a completely new utility for Mastercam 2024 called Process Hole. The idea of Process Hole is you can create template files that include a lot of standard hole types that you would normally cut. Once you've created that, if you run into a part where you are using the same type of hole, then you can simply apply a process to it rather than having to build operations. This is really great if you're doing repetitive hole making work. What's nice about this is that because it is only using solid holes that have history, it doesn't actually matter if the depths change because it can account for that. So that's really neat. Let's take a look at the simple application of this. And we're not going to get too deep into it because when we go to our new feature breakdown, we're really going to break this one down. We're going to talk about how template files work, how to build them, and how to make sure that you're consistent across parts, because that's pretty important here. So let's take a look at our example. All right, so I have these 4 holes that I want to cut. It could be including these as well, but we're going to assume that this is a 3-axis machine. So I would want to go over to Process Hole, which is here in the utilities, then select our holes. All I'm going to do here is Control-click, and that will pick all of the holes. Notice the naming here. This is because the holes have history, and it's selecting the entire hole, not just the solid face that I picked. There's also some sorting options here. So you can do this by tool, which makes the most sense in this case. You can do it by hole if you want to do each hole individually before moving on. All tools in a plane, which means that this does include multi-axis capability, or all holes in plane, same thing. There's also an option to add avoidance. So if you do have anything you need to avoid, just add that in there. Next, we go to the process page. And here you can pick an MCAM file that has the processes that you've defined already. Once you've selected it, then any processes that match the hole that you've selected will show up in this dropdown. So here I have a 1/4" socket head cap screw through with chamfer. So we have drill counter bore, helix bore, and chamfer drill. Finally, we have the linking. So the clearance on the linking is the thing that will not carry over. So you will need to make sure that you check this page. In this case, I want to use a minimum height clearance plane of like 0.1, and that should be good enough. You do also have options for safety zone for multi-axis. So with that short process, we now have process hole here. And if I backplot this, we can see the drilling followed by a helix bore in each hole, followed by a chamfer drill to get that top chamfer. All 3 operations neatly packed into one spot. I love this. This is really awesome. Now, if you do need to modify this, you can right-click and choose to explode process hole, and then you get 3 separate operations. So if you need to make some kind of a change, that's how you can do it. The best example of this might be if you need to change the sort order, because you may have noticed that there's no particular sorting for process hole. So that's one time where you might want to use it. But we're going to get much more in depth on this in our new feature breakdown next month, so make sure that you get registered for those. We're going to be sending out invites for that pretty darn soon. So the last feature I want to talk about today is the toolpath parameter default loading. This is an interesting one. I'm pretty excited about it. I think that there's a lot of potential for this. And I think that with some work building up kind of a base, this can really, really change the way that you program in a way that is pretty profoundly powerful. Back when we did Streaming Teacher, there was a presentation, there's actually 2 presentations that we did that was kind of all about how to use import to import existing toolpaths into parts to get a more efficient programming. And this is kind of like that, but it's really a smoother, cleaner version of that is built in that just makes it easier to use. So the idea here is that instead of just having one set of defaults, you can load your defaults from somewhere else. You can create multiple defaults files. You can also just pull it from an MCAM file, which is pretty great because then you just have an application, you program a few different versions of it, and then you can bring in those defaults. So let's take a look at how we could use this to standardize our programming and make it quick and easy. All right, so I've got this file open, and let's say I'm going to add an OptiRef toolpath. Now at this point, what I would do is go up to this button right here. This is the new Load Toolpath Parameters from a File button. When we click this, we get a panel interface, and you get 2 options. Default will bring in your standard inch default or whatever default you have tied to that machine definition. It will pull that up and let you use that. If you choose Custom, this allows you to select either MCAM-operation files or MCAM files. In this case, I've selected an MCAM file from elsewhere on my system. Within that, because it sees that I'm doing an OptiRef, it's found all of the other OptiRef options in here. So let's say it's this one, stock with large step down and step ups. Green check. What's happened is it's adjusted almost every parameter within this toolpath parameters panel. It can adjust our cut parameters. It can adjust steep shallow if you want it to. It can preset all of your linking parameters. It can preset your arc filter tolerance, which I think is huge. The only thing it's really not going to do is select your geometry for you. So I'd still need to go in and select this. But it's nice because this allows you to create a strategy. Let's say that you have particular strategies that you want to use. Let's go back to that list for a second. So we have default, we have stock with large step down and step ups. We have multiple stock values, or we have small step down with large step over. So these are different approaches you might want to take depending on your application. By pre-building these in a different file and having them ready to go, you can reference them in any program that comes up. So if you have 8 different methods for how you want to approach Opti, just build them here and then you're ready to go. So I think this is crazy useful for speeding up our toolpathing as long as we're willing to take the time to do that initial setup. Another thing that's pretty cool is if we click on this little dropdown, this is actually going to bring us that same list. We have our standard toolpath defaults, and then we also get the list of all of the options that are available from the file that was chosen in the other window. So that way, it's kind of like, oh, I changed my mind, I want to use this version instead. You just click it and it reloads it. So that's a really cool way to handle your toolpath defaults with Mastercam 2024. So all that to say, I didn't do a really fleshed out example on this one because I felt like what we had here didn't really show the true potential of what this can do. So my plan is for our new feature breakdown, I'm actually going to spend some time on this one and we're going to really see what this can do. I'm going to try to use this in a few different applications and show you how quickly we can program a part by just having some presets made and things that we can use between a variety of different parts. So all that said, if you want to learn more, again, we have 2 webinars coming out next month. New feature breakdown, parts 1 and 2. We're going to be announcing those in our newsletter, I think on June 1st. So make sure that you have an eye out for that. If you're not on the newsletter, you can go to mcamnw.com and you can scroll to the bottom and there should be a newsletter sign up down there. You can also read the What's New PDF in the handouts. So in the same panel that you have chat, there's a handouts tab. You can go ahead and go there, and there should be a download available for the What's New in 2024 as of public beta 4. So you can download that and you can read that on your own time as well. But additionally, if you really want to get on this now and start using it in your shop, if you are on maintenance, you can join the beta program at any time. Just make sure to go to mastercam.com, make sure you have an account, and that account is linked. Once you're there, you should be able to go ahead and download the beta version of the software, get that installed, and be able to use it just like you would a standard version of Mastercam, but with all these great new features a little bit in advance.